I am very proud to be introducing your moderator for the day, who's Jesse Wente. I'm proud because I listen to him on the CBC and I love, I think, nearly everybody on the CBC, but Jesse is among them. He is the head of he is the head of film programs at TIFF Bell Lightbox. He ran the first major curatorial, that's a word, project at TIFF Bell Lightbox. So it was a landmark film program, first people's cinema, 1,500 nations, one tradition. He has also been a programmer for Imaginative Film and Media Festival. He is, as we know, a well-known film critic and broadcaster in Toronto and across Canada. He has a weekly column on Metro Morning and lots of other CBC shows. He's a regular guest on CBC News World, News Morning, Weekend Edition, as well as Q, and Saturday Night of the Movies at TVO. I'm so sorry, I have to interrupt myself now because I was given instructions before. Speaking of TVO, there are people filming here. This is TVO Parents. Everything that you see today, all these panels, the information that comes, will all be up on their website. There will be clips, there will be information, so don't panic, it will all be there. Anyway, we're very, very happy to have Jesse Wente moderating this panel because he's not only a really great radio guy, but he has been a wonderful, wonderful advocate for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit culture, and we look forward to his hosting. Thank you, Jesse.
Well, I'm so very happy to be here. That was a rather exhaustive CV, I think, that was given on that one. So I apologize for that. I'm so pleased to be here. Before I start, I first want to acknowledge the Mississaugas of the New Credit, as well as the Haudenosaunee nations for having us here on their land. They are the original inhabitants of this land, so I thank them for allowing us here. I want to introduce our esteemed panel. Next to me is Dr. Pamela Rose Toulouse, who's an associate professor in the School of Education at Laurentian University. She's well known for her contributions to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education. Pamela has published well over 30 resources. Well, that's exhaustive. That include books, chapters in books, curriculum pieces, articles, videos, and other key selections. She's originally from the community of Sagamuk First Nation. She's a proud Ojibwe Odawa woman. I like that. Who comes from a long line of educators. Pamela celebrates many years of activity in the formal educational setting, beginning as an elementary school teacher and then finding herself in the role of a colleague within the university system. She teaches primary junior methods, junior intermediate methods, and native studies as a teachable. Her areas of specialty are classroom management, lesson planning, learning cycles, assessment evaluation, technology, differentiated instruction, and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit education. Welcome, Dr. Toulouse.
Yeah.
Next to her is Wanda Botsworth, as an education officer with the Métis Nation of Ontario, where she focuses on K-12 education. Prior to her position with the MNO, Wanda was a consultant specializing in marketing and public education for municipal and provincial governments, private industry, political, and marketing groups. She was strongly affected by the stories of First Nation and Métis people when advocating for them on behalf of a member of Parliament. She's deeply involved in her own Métis community and is keen to learn as much about Métis and First Nations history and culture. She has a passion for telling stories about Métis ancestors, reinvigorating Métis culture, closing learning and participating gaps, creating positive school environments for all children, as well as building partnerships. Welcome, Wanda. And Dr. Susan D. Dion is an Indigenous scholar who's been working in the field of education for more than 25 years. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at York University here in Toronto, and her research interests include decolonizing and indigenizing education, urban Aboriginal education, and violence prevention in Indigenous communities. Susan works in collaboration with the TDSB Aboriginal Education Centre on research and program development. She's widely consulted by diverse community groups, workplaces, and institutions on developing methods for building more equitable, respectful relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. Susan's book, titled Braiding Histories, Learning from Aboriginal People's Experiences and Perspectives, is available from the University of British Columbia Press. Welcome, Dr. Dion. So I think we should start with an opening sort of statement from each of you. Dr. Toulouse, what should we know at this point about First Nations, Métis, Inuit peoples, both in terms of the contemporary experience and the historical perspective?
Well, I'm actually going to do this, I think, a little bit differently.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some audience participation, and I'm very hyperactive, so the one thing that I have a hard time with is sitting still, so I'm going to be moving a little bit. So you're going to take a piece of paper. I want you to take a piece of paper, everybody. You're like, I came here just to listen. What do you mean I got to take a piece of paper now? All right, you're going to take a piece of paper, and what you're going to do is you're going to fold it into 4 sections. So I want you to fold it. Fold it into 4 sections.
Do I have to do it too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once you've folded it into 4 sections, what I would like you to do is I would like you just to number it 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's all, okay? There's no wrong way to do this, no wrong way at all. Everybody's got paper. Good stuff. Now, here's the other thing. So here's a little bit of some good rules and some good ways for us to proceed. So here's number 1 thing. There's no wrong way to do this. You can write it or else you can draw it, okay? So that's number 1. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce myself in a good way. So what I say is I say Ani to everybody. So I'd like you to wave at me and say Ani.
Ani.
Okay, in my language, that's hello. Ojibwe, I want you to take the other hand, say Wache. That is Cree for hello. And I want you with some attitude for our Hungwe brothers and sisters. Take both hands, wave, and say Sego.
Sego.
All right. Now, at number 1, what you're going to write down is this. I'm going to give you a very basic question. And there's no wrong way to answer this. But I want you just to take maybe 10 seconds. First thing that comes to mind, the Freudian slip. I want you to record, what do you know about Indigenous peoples? What do you know? Let's start with that first question. What do you know? And if you got nothing, just put a big question mark. It's almost like a game show. I'm starting to count it down now. So what do you know at number 1? Pardon? That's exactly what you can put in number 1 for sure. I love that. Miigwech. Thank you. Now, once you've done that, and you have like again, number 1, what do you know? I want you to go to number 2, and you're going to record, well, who informed you about that? So who told you about Indigenous peoples? Where did you learn it from? That's the question, okay? So where did you learn it from? And if you don't know, there's no wrong way to answer that either. So that's at number 2. You're going to write down, where did you learn it? All good?
I think I got this.
All right. The next thing that we're going to do, once you've done that, I want you to count with me. So we're going to show me what, again, your 10 digits look like. So let's count together. So we're going to count all the way to 500 starting now. 10, 20, 30, 40, 500. We're done. All right. So now, here's what's going to happen. So we're all going to start off with this on the, hopefully, like, with the same knowledge base. So what's really important to know is that, number 1, I'm from Sagamok First Nation. I'm Ojibwe and Odawa. But my nation only represents, like, 1 out of, like, a minimum of 500 nations in North America. So we'll go right to the map. So what's really important about my nation is that our traditional territories, are just over the Great Lakes, and we have many things that we know about the world and we've given to the world. So we always want to start with the truth, okay? Start with the truth. So here's your task for number 3. When you hear something you never knew, or you're like, yeah, I knew all that already. What you're going to do is you're going to record something that you're like, I want to learn more about it, okay? So that's number 3. So there are 500 distinct nations. My nation is only one of them, and every single one of those nations had their own worldview, language, inventions, innovations that they gave to the world. So we're going to head over to the next one, and what they gave to the world is this. So mine is, there it is. So if we take a look again at those geographical areas, so some of the things that were given to the world that nobody seems to know about is that our Arctic brothers and sisters, those wonderful Indigenous people, gave flotation devices, home insulation, kayaks, and portable space heaters. Not only that, California, those wonderful brothers and sisters to the south of us, gave to the world asphalt, chewing gum, detergents, and hair conditioners. Circum-Caribbean, which are like at the tail end of Turtle Island, which I know North America to be, gave to the world avocados, barbecues, hammocks, and sweetened bell peppers. Our Great Basin brothers and sisters gave to the world laminated bows, indigestion medication, ephedra, and insecticides. And the Great Plains people gave to the world antiviral meds, calendars, disposable diapers, sign language, and teepees. And in fact, the Great Plains people, which is about 25 out of about 500 nations, are the only ones that had teepees. And but a lot of people, when they think about Native people, they're like, oh, they're all teepees, or else they're in igloos or long houses. But the fact is, 500 nations, 500 forms of housing. So again, these are the only nations because it made sense. They followed the buffalo. Mesoamericans gave to the world barbershops and aesthetics. They also gave chocolate and geometry to the world. And we also have, oh, thank goodness, Northeast, I'm really glad you did it. They gave us potato chips, and it's all here, folks, all here and happy. All right. They also gave lacrosse and astronomy to the world. Northwest gave to the world architects, anti-asthmatic meds, needles, and X-ray art. The Plateau gave many wonderful gifts to the world, Appaloosa horse breeds, and also, again, you know, the particular science of breeding animals as well, to make sure that they were suited for that environment. Plant classification. A lot of wars would not have been won without our people. And Southeast gave to the world pumpkins, you know, seawalls, herb gardens. They also gave to the world arthritis treatments. And apartment complexes. Everybody thinks basketball came from Naismith. Wrong. Yeah, wrong. It came from the Southwest nations, and again, that basketball was like an important part of their culture and their traditions. Surgical drainage and road systems. If you traveled on a major highway that's a good highway, folks, it's built upon the trail systems of Anishinaabeg, Mushkegowuk, and Ungwe peoples, and it's the good road systems, okay? Not the ones that have the poor infrastructure with holes all over the place and you got to pay a big toll. No, not at all. It's the ones that are the good roads. So subarctic gave to the world board games, copper mining, hockey, and snowshoes. The first game of hockey was observed by Jesuits, observed a group of Algonquin women now playing the sport known as hockey, all right? So yes, you can thank us for the Toronto Maple Leafs doing well. Anyways. What I want you to do is whatever you recorded in number 3 as the primary thing that you've learned so far, I'd like you to share it with a partner at your table. You can share it now. If you're like, I learned nothing at all, that's okay too. There you go. There's what I... Thank you. This is what I teach at, because I want us to be at the same level before I go. I've only got 3 minutes to do the next part, so it's all good. Yeah, Peter. Yeah. Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah. Yeah, the next one. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. Wonderful people. I want you to look at me, and what I want you to do, I'm going to teach you a word in my language. I want you to smile, so look at me and smile. Oh, what beautiful smiles we got going on. I want you to smile at your table. Give them a look like, you know, you are the best looking group I've ever seen. All right. Now, I'm going to teach you a word, so you're going to practice with me. Ch, ba, pe. Chabape. That means laughter. So laughter is a really important gift in my community, because one of the things, again, with Indigenous learners is that one of the most important things in a classroom is humor. Humor and trust, okay? If you want to know if I trust you, the only way you're going to know is if I tease you in a respectful way. So we know what good, respectful teasing is. So that's how you know. So humor is so important in schools, because that's how our kids demonstrate that I trust you. This is a safe learning environment. So one of the other key things for schools as well, and that's so important, is that the entire child, the entire part of them, the entire everything has to be honored. So we think about the spiritual elements, the physical elements, the emotional and the intellectual. So some of the things when I talk about spiritual and whenever we talk about holistic approaches in classes, it means that you approach things by taking respectful, authentic, respectful resources from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, and that those are incorporated and infused in the classrooms for all kids. Because what has happened is that Canadians really have been denied the opportunity to learn the truth about Indigenous peoples. And the majority of Canadians have been informed by a John Wayne Western version of what Native people are, right? It's like, oh, all the teepees, they got the braids, they got this, and that is the furthest from the truth, and it's one of the biggest gaps in knowledge that we have, and which really has decimated the ability for us to have positive relationships with each other. So what has happened is also, I would see this happening also in classrooms, the physical environment, a lot of interactivity and collaboration. I would see a lot of visual and hands-on activities. We're visual people. We listen, we watch. We wouldn't have been able to survive all of those years without those abilities and embedded in our DNA to be able to observe. We also, the emotional. Our kids need trust. They need classrooms where they can take risks, where they're honored, where they see themselves reflected in the classroom walls and the classroom curriculum. They need to have the time to be able to tell stories, to do group talk, and to also have a lot of humor. The other thing is, too, the intellectual, the use of mini lessons, having consistent procedures and routines and high expectations of them. So where the expectations are that I know that you can succeed and I'm going to be there to support you with an entire community and network of individuals. So that is what is really, really important to our kids. And I want to share with you one thing. So I want you to take your hands. And I want you to, with your hands, show me what does Canada look like. There's no wrong way to do this. Oh, it's over here. Oh, there it is. British Columbia. Oh, Queen Charlotte Islands, right over here. There it is. Let's go down Great Lakes. Oh, yeah, okay. So we all know what it looks like? Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So people got their Canada maps going. So I'm going to share with you why it is that it's so important that people learn about Indigenous peoples and that it's also included in classrooms. I really believe that that our society is dependent and the survival of our society is dependent upon Indigenous knowledge. I really do believe that. So as an example, our teachings, the good things that we have in our life can inform people, again, how to live in a good way, although you may have your good ways too. But I'm going to give you an example. Kina de. So try it with me. Say it. Kina de. Kina de. For us, in my territory, in Ojibwe territory, is how we say Canada. And there's also the other version, you know, the Kanat, the heritage clips, right? Okay? Well, our version is, you know, Kinade. There it is, you know, beautiful land. And for us, Kinade, the entire country that we see, means this. So translated, Kina, everything that you see around you. De, which means the heart, and the heart comes directly from the Creator. So everything that you see around you has the heart of the Creator. And if we approached our country in that way and the treatment of each other in that way, I think that we would have a very different place altogether. And with that, I'd say miigwech.
Wanda, do we want to talk a bit about the Métis and the gaps in between for the Métis learnings and teachings?
Bonjour, bonjour, and hello. My given name is Wanda. My Ojibwe name is Asanikwe Jumamana, Mother Rock. And I'm very proud to be Métis. I have respect for both my ancestral cultures, First Nation and European, but I also recognize that as a Métis, I'm very unique. Today, it's a great day for Métis people. See, Ministry of Education provided us with some stats. They gave us some student achievement data, and we recognize that this isn't easy. It wasn't an easy task to do that. But this gives us some data for evidence-based decision-making. In addition, People for Education took a look at that data, and instead of focusing on the achievement gaps, they focused on some key questions. What are the gaps in resources? What are the gaps in the way in which our history, our culture, and our perspectives is taught in the schools? For that, I thank you. On behalf of all the Métis people, in Ontario. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your wisdom, for your insight, for your kindness, for your dedication, and also thank you for bringing in Pedro Noguero. He was great, wasn't he? There are also some school boards and some educators who are doing some great work in bringing Métis culture and the stories into the schools. Thank you for that. And to all of you, just for being here. Thank you to all of you, and we hope you'll work with us collaboratively into the future. Now, understanding the gaps is very important to us because our children are our greatest priority. We encourage every student to aspire to his or her highest potential. What are the gaps? Well, first of all, there's a gap in identifying Métis students. According to Statistics Canada in 2011, there were 19,045 Métis students in Ontario, but Métis numbers are very dramatically underreported. And the reason for underreporting is in our Métis story. You see, many of our Métis ancestors hid the fact that they were Métis from their children. And that started in the late 1800s, and it continued right up until 20 to 30 years ago. Now, why would they do that? Why would they hide that? Well, there are many reasons. For example, they hid themselves to protect the children, to protect them from racism and protect them from having to go to the residential schools. So now when you look at the People for Education research, some of the principals noted that there are no students of Aboriginal heritage at our school, and there is no need here. That's possible, but as mentioned, the Métis ID student numbers are underreported, and you can't tell we're Métis by looking at us. We're an invisible minority, but we're here. We've always been here in Ontario. Well, not always. Our First Nations people have been here longer, but we've been here for a very long time. There's a gap in Métis distinction under the Aboriginal umbrella. The term Aboriginal is sometimes mistakenly used or misunderstood to mean only First Nations people. However, Aboriginal means all three Aboriginal peoples in Canada. It's First Nations, it's Métis, it's Inuit. So in order to avoid such misunderstandings, we often ask for the distinction to be made. So whenever you feel like saying Aboriginal, just substitute First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and I've noticed that most people are doing that today, and I thank you for that. We have different issues, different opportunities, and different approaches. There's a knowledge gap for teachers. Teacher candidates generally aren't learning Métis education in the faculties of education. And as mentioned in the 2013 First Nation Métis Inuit Education Report by People for Education, there's no requirement for teacher candidates to learn Aboriginal education courses. And we also had some research done by Susan Dion that was specific to Métis education, and she had similar findings. Experienced teachers also aren't necessarily learning Aboriginal education. People for Education report that 51% of elementary schools and 41% of secondary schools offer no Aboriginal education opportunities, such as professional development for teachers or cultural support programs. So teachers aren't necessarily comfortable in teaching Métis education. There's a resource gap. As noted in the 2013 First Nation Métis Inuit Education Report by People for Education, there's significant resource gaps facing schools serving high numbers or high proportions of Aboriginal students. There's a gap in Métis culture. The resources being used in Ontario schools are not necessarily culturally relevant for Métis. Our educational materials here are very Eurocentric. Curricula and instructional delivery do not take into account Métis cultural considerations and do not reflect Métis values. Cultural activities like jigging or symbols like the Métis sash are often missing in schools, and these might seem like small details, but they're big messages. They say welcome, they say I'm happy you're here, they say we have respect for your culture, they say you no longer have to hide. There's a gap in the accuracy of Métis history. Now, many of our older history texts used in schools have some serious inadequacies and inaccuracies, and in the Métis story, they just tell fragments of the story. Métis history has moved forward, and it's been validated in many recent court cases. It's very important to us that Métis history is rewritten within the curriculum and the resources to erase the mythical history and just to separate the propaganda from the truth, just to ensure that students are learning accurate and full accounts of Métis history. There's a language gap. Now, in many cases, our Métis children, they're scolded in school because they're speaking slang French, and it's not recognized that they're speaking Michif. Now, our Michif language, it evolved during the fur trade, and that's when First Nations and Métis and European peoples all worked together. They had equal footing. First Nations people weren't expected to assimilate into Euro-Canadian culture, and their language was respected. And you had Métis people who went between all the groups, so they were multilingual, they were multicultural. And as the language evolved, we just morphed the Old French and the First Nation language into one that had roots in both the languages. So when you look at how the Michif language evolved, we could learn lessons today. There's some beauty in the inclusion. There's some beauty just in the harmony. There's a gap in Métis vision of success. Now, we agree that it's very important for our children to learn numeracy and literacy and science, but our definition of success and well-being is much broader. It includes physical, mental, and emotional health, spirituality, and cultural awareness. There's a knowledge gap for all students, a very serious knowledge gap. In our Métis history, there are many stories, and they're good and they're bad, but there are stories. They're the Canadian story, not just the Aboriginal story, and all Canadians have many lessons to learn from that story. If we have different groups in Canada and Ontario learning different stories and different sum totals of those stories, don't you think that in itself is going to create problems moving into the future? We at the Métis Nation of Ontario believe that some of the misconceptions today are fostered by the fact that Canadians don't know, and they've just never been taught First Nation, Métis, and Inuit history adequately. We absolutely agree with People for Education's position that all students need to know the history and the culture of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, not just as an add-on, but infused within the education system for all of Ontario. There's a gap in funding. At MNO, we have a framework agreement and memorandums of understanding with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities, and this has allowed us to really move the agenda forward. But there's still a need for longer-term commitment with multi-year dedicated investments because we have a lot of work to do. In moving forward, the Métis Nation of Ontario has been working to advance the agenda, to address the gaps, and just to open some doors. The MNO is committed to supporting Métis student self-identification, creating Métis-specific educational materials, and supporting students, families, and educators. And we've seen a lot of positive results and progress, and we acknowledge the strength that's coming from partnerships with the province and the growing connections to school boards and other key education partners. And we remain committed to working in partnership with educators, policymakers, to support children and youth to attain their highest potential. Each time we take steps forward, it's a great day for Métis people.
Dr. Dion?
Okay. Neolangamati, Quinganawa Nida Shinzi, Susan. Non-GIE Nahi, Wak Toronto. Ni Dilana Pewe, Potwatome. Non-GIE Nahi, Anashik. So my name's Susan, and I'm saying hello to you in my Indigenous language, which is Lenape. And my ancestors' traditional territory was on the eastern seaboard of what's now the United States. So we've been in contact with settlers for a very long time, and I'm very new to speaking my language. Like I said, we've been in contact for over 500 years, so there are very few speakers of Lenape. So I want to start, by acknowledging Alanis Obobswin, who's in the audience today. Pamela asked, one of her questions was, who taught you what you know? And Alanis is one of the people who has taught me. Because like many Canadians, I grew up very much, I consider myself a survivor of the policy of forced assimilation. I grew up in an urban environment, removed from my community because of the policies of the Indian Act. And I had to look to, cultural production by Aboriginal artists like Alanis to relearn the teachings that I had been denied access to. So it's really, I appreciate your work so much. And I want to say that, the work of Aboriginal artists is so important for all of us as educators, as a way of accessing the knowledge. There are many teachers, and I really think that it's so important that I acknowledge that there are many teachers in Ontario and across the country that are working very hard to address the knowledge gap. And there are teachers who are doing excellent work. That being said, the majority of us as educators, we went to school at a time when Aboriginal content wasn't a part of our education. And it's a huge issue for us to take on that responsibility, to accept that responsibility to do the learning. And rarely are we given time and opportunity to do that learning that we all need to do as educators. So I work with a team of educators at the Aboriginal Education Centre at the Toronto District School Board. And working with them, I know how overwhelming and challenging it can be to address the depth of the People for Education, they talk about the knowledge gap. And in my work, I've often talked about teacher ignorance. And I think one of the things that we need to do as teachers, as educators, as Canadians, is to get comfortable with that notion that we do have a depth of ignorance. And that, in fact, the research, and my research in particular, has paid close attention to the significance of that ignorance. Actually, as Canadians, we have a vested interest in maintaining the ignorance, right? Coming to know what the history of Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal relationships on this land is discomforting to us as Canadians, and particularly as educators. We're taught to teach about a proud past, about the settlers who came and built this wonderful nation. So the story of Aboriginal people as the people of the past, that's a comfortable story for us to tell. The post-contact relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people creates a lot of discomfort within us. And so, there's a comfort in turning away from it. There's a comfort of leaving that unit till the end of the year, and then, oops, we ran out of time. We didn't get to teach that content. It's because it's hard. It's hard content to teach. And if we as teachers didn't learn it in school and didn't learn it, in the Faculty of Education, the challenge of doing the work can be overwhelming. But the discomfort and the overwhelmingness, we can't let that stop us from doing the work. Right? I think that the report by the People for Education and a great deal of work that's being done, the Idle No More movement, has really raised the consciousness of Canadians to the point where people are starting to pay attention and starting to realize, how do I get past my fear of these stories and come to know the stories? So One of the questions I was asked to address is what can we do in faculties of education? And I've spent a lot of time, the Métis Education Study, the Decolonizing Our Schools report, I've spent a lot of time considering this question. And I think that we need to think about how do we make change to pre-service teacher education, but we can't leave it there. In-service teachers need opportunities for professional development. Teachers who are in classrooms today need time to work through the depth of their resistance and that deep ignorance that we have cultivated in educators. Teachers need to have time to do that work. Principals, supervisory officers, directors of education, trustees, all need opportunities to engage with Aboriginal education so we can address that overwhelming fear and that overwhelming belief that Aboriginal education is only important for Aboriginal students. So we need to integrate this content and these lessons at different levels. And then in thinking about what's happening specifically here in Ontario and the changes to the BEd program, I'm thinking we need opportunities for teachers to have Aboriginal content across the program. If they're going to be in the faculty for 2 years or 4 terms, however that comes to be experienced, they need opportunities across those 4 terms to engage with Aboriginal education. It can't be just one course and just the Aboriginal instructor teaching the content. It has to be all instructors in the faculty integrating the content. And then I think we also have to create opportunities for people to have specialized opportunities to become specialists. If we really want to transform schools and transform what people know, we need to have specialists that we can turn to. So some concentrated teachings integrated across the curriculum and some opportunities for specialization. That's my goal, and that's what I'm working to accomplish, not just in the Faculty of Education at York, but across Bachelor of Education programs across Ontario. So, Anna Sheik.
Well, I want to thank you all for your comments. Very inspiring. Indeed, I love what you said about the discomfort around the discussions of these. It's something I speak a lot about, and it is unavoidable, I think, when we come to this. But what I'd like to maybe start our conversation is the why it's important to get through the discomfort. So why it's important, because this is an incredibly challenging issue we're talking here, is First Nations education and Métis and Inuit education, not only on reserve but off reserve, as the report talks about. And it is multifaceted. It is tied, as you all spoken to, the long history of our people here on this land, and it is incredibly daunting, not just for educators, but I think for all levels of government and for the Canadian populace to have this discussion. Let's talk about, though, what the end game and why the results that will actually come when we do have this discussion and we do engage. Why is it so important? Yeah. What is the end game, the results that will become of this conversation?
It's a community. Yeah. So again, for me, whenever I think about having those conversations of discomfort is not a bad thing. Discomfort is a good place to start because it helps us to investigate how in our own lives we have privilege, we have power, and that's not a bad thing, because that's like the first stage of coming to terms with what I would call debwewen, which in my language is the truth, and the truth is something that needs to be heard. These conversations are really important because every time that an Indigenous child succeeds in school, it's not just about a child doing well in school. It's not about a child going out and being well-rounded and being again, intellectually supported and having those good social supports, you end up, that one child affects an entire community. And I know that as myself, as coming from Sagamok First Nation, I grew up on a reserve and in Northern Ontario, and had some very interesting experiences getting off the bus when I first went to a provincial school from off the res. So the thing is that once I went through school, and also my siblings, is that the entire community celebrated when I got my PhD. It wasn't just about me getting my PhD, or else my sister becoming a water control operator, or else a computer programmer, getting an AZ license. It was like everybody in the community had got the AZ license and the PhD, and it was a celebration. So having these conversations is important to the actual survival and thriving of an entire community, not just one person, because we're all interconnected. So that's why those conversations are so important. And it's something that makes us face ourselves, which can be the most terrifying thing, but it's also a good thing. It's something that we should be doing daily.
Demographically, we really don't have a choice but to address it, because Aboriginal peoples present with the highest birth rate here in Canada. And Aboriginal youth will be a growing component of our school-age children. Engaged learners, it's just the well-being of the country. We want to engage our learners, all of them. And the Métis Nation of Ontario believes that with quality education, Métis people specifically will be contributing, and they'll be productive citizens. They'll make a greater earnings. They'll be able to provide more opportunities to their children, and they'll help to build a thriving economy. So we want our future generations, we want them to be active participants, because it's a knowledge-based economy now. That's just a key ingredient to be active participants. And we need to have healthy, vibrant communities, because when you look specifically at our people, we want to be able to celebrate, we want to be able to continue with our way of life, but this all works with it. If we can just stretch our elastic as a province and as a country, we'll create a society of respect and inclusion, and we all benefit. We benefit from the richness of all the cultures in this room and in our province and in our country. And the only way we can begin to change our reality is, and just change the story and correct it, we have to learn about it. We all need to learn all the lessons that go with it, and then we can move forward in a positive direction. If we could truly erase the knowledge gap, it would be a great day for all Canadians.
Yeah. What?
I just, I think what I want to echo here is the fact that we live in relationship with each other. Like my kids go to school with non-Aboriginal kids, and so what non-Aboriginal kids and what non-Aboriginal teachers know about us and what they don't know matters a great deal. Right? The interactions that they have with their classmates, when a classmate says to my daughter, after 5 days of indoor recess because of the rain, and turns to my daughter and says, "Oh, Vanessa, you're Native. Couldn't you do a dance, but instead of a rain dance, could you make it a stop raining dance?"
Yeah.
Those kinds of interactions matter a great deal. And the thing about that story was the teacher heard that statement. And when Vanessa looked to her teacher for help, her teacher looked away.
Yeah.
But there's no malice intended in that look away. Yeah. The teacher looked away because she didn't know what to do, because she hasn't had the opportunity to learn what to do in response. And the interesting thing, Vanessa doesn't want her classmate reprimanded. What Vanessa wants is to be able to say, actually, I don't know. I don't know. And do you know how much it hurts? Do you know how much it hurts me that I don't know that? I know that I'm First Nations, I know I'm Lenape, but I don't know what that means, because no one's been able to teach her.
Yeah.
And our kids, they go to school, and we teach our kids. We say, go to school, get an education, learn your history, learn your, find out who you are. And then our kids go to school, And what they're taught is that, you know, they don't exist, that Aboriginal people are people of the past. And then there's so much conflict inside of them to try and come to terms with that. And then we wonder why, you know, why they leave school. Because being in school hurts too much.
Yeah.
You know, we need to change the classroom. We need to change the school experience. And we need to recognize that we all, this is, you know, Aboriginal history is Canadian history.
It is.
It's the history
Yeah.
of,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the history of
Yeah,
this
it
land.
is. Yeah.
It's the history, you know, people will say to me, just this week, a colleague said to me, I said, you know, this history is so important for all of us, and it's all of our histories. And she said to me, she said, well, it's not mine, I'm an immigrant. And I said, wait a minute, whose land do you live on?
Yeah.
How did this land become available for you and your family to come and live on? You have made your home here. Whose land is it? How did it become available for you? Yeah. We're in a relationship, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. If you live on our land, you are in a relationship with us. Yeah. And if we want new and better and you know, relationships where we all get to be human, where we all get to have honor and respect, then we need to know the stories of this land. And we need to read the books, we need to read the novels, we need to watch the movies made by Aboriginal filmmakers, we need to you know, listen to the stories so that we can engage and come to know who we are in relationship with each other.
Well, I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank you all for attending here. I will leave you with one teaching that I had from my elders, and one that governs a lot of Indigenous behavior, which is you do everything in life for the effect it will have 7 generations later. And so when I look out at educators, I ask you, because as a father of 2 young Indigenous kids who are now in the TDSB school system, and I would ask Canada, consider what you would do now if you actually thought about what it would mean 7 generations now, and how everything we would do might be affected by that single idea. It is an Indigenous idea. And I thank you very much for coming. I hopefully panel will stick around in case you have questions. I do want to say, Alanisa Bomswin, who's my guest here, and is truly one of the great treasures of Canada and a great filmmaker, her movie called Hi Ho Mr. Hay, which is about First Nations education, is playing this week at the place I run, Tifbell Lightbox downtown. I happen to have a few tickets for tonight and tomorrow night's screening that I'd be happy to hand out if you're interested. And I encourage you to check out the movie at the NFB. It is a vital film that speaks directly about this issue. I thank you again.